Meanwhile, in terms of legal trouble, there's also Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden appeared before the United States Congress today, did a deposition for hours on end. Among the people asking him questions, my next guest, Congressman Pat Fallon from Texas, is a member of the House Oversight Committee, had a chance to question Hunter today. Congressman, good to have you with us. Thank you, sir.
Vince, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, and I know it was an exhausting day, so I'm grateful for you being here. Give us your top-line takeaways, if you will.
Top line takeaway number one is no one should ever be subjected to being in a room with Hunter Biden for 7 hours. That'd be my top one. But as we began, Vince, it was evident to me that the Democrats, no matter what was said there, unless he actually did a mea culpa and said I was the bag man, they were going to go out in front of the cameras and claim and cry victory. No direct evidence. What do you think this guy's going to do? He's going to actually admit that he did these things? Of course he's not. He's going to obfuscate, but. It's partially a court of public opinion as far as a rational, reasonable, objective mind. What would you think if X? And so there were some interesting takeaways, one of which was he did admit that he would call his father when he was with business associates, and he would put him on speakerphone. He said that might have happened 20, 30 times. He didn't think that was a lot because over the course of doing business for 10 years, under his explanation, he said, that's only 2 or 3 times a year. That's very normal. My father just called in to say hello. So then when I directly questioned him, I said, so you think that's normal? I see a very ugly pattern where you have people like Yelena Baturina gives you and your business partners $3.5 million. She ends up having dinner with the then vice president. Same thing with Knez Rashekev from Kazakhstan, another corrupt oligarch. He gives your partner $142,300, and your partner buys a Porsche for you for that exact same amount the very next day, and your partner testifies he doesn't really know why he ever got the money. Then you've got Vanan Pazarsky, executive in Burisma, another corrupt energy firm in Ukraine. They're paying you $65,000 a month for 5 years was the original deal. And then they have dinner with your father at Cafe Milano. Jonathan Lee, pays you. He said, oh, no, I never got any Chinese money. We said, what about Jonathan Lee? He gave you $250,000. Oh, no. See, Vince, that was a loan. Did you ever repay the loan? Well, no, I sold that company that took on the loan. And, so just playing these games with splitting hairs, and they can never explain substantively what he did other than, quote unquote, provide corporate governance and advice.
So as I understand it, though, I mean, to your point about all the phone calls, Hunter Biden comes into this today. We saw an opening statement where he denies that his father was involved in his business in any way. Yet the public record on this is crystal clear, whether it's golf outings or meetings in China or Hunter flying on Air Force Two to visit with business partners or meetings at Cafe Milano, phone calls where Biden calls in and greases the tracks on some sort of business deal that Hunter's engaged in. There's endless examples of Hunter Biden being actively involved in at least as a parlor trick in order to get Hunter Biden very enriched.
Yeah, he would claim that he didn't remember things, but he wouldn't dispute it either because he was being very careful about not perjuring himself. I don't recall that, but I'm not disputing it either.
Right.
For instance, there was a big meeting with one of the wealthiest men in China, and it happened at the Four Seasons in Washington, where this guy rolls with like a dozen people. He had an interpreter. It was a big deal. His father, according to testimony of Devin Archer, it was either Devin Archer or Rob Walker, one of his business associates and close friends. According to them, his father came, Joe Biden, spoke to them, not just, hey, met, gave them like a little speech. And a couple of soon thereafter, this deal was locked in,
yes,
and they got $5 million. So he said, Hunter today said under oath, he doesn't remember that. He may have been there. He's not disputing it, but he can't recall. How do you not recall that? That's a big meeting.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Did the text message where he threatened the Chinese businessman come up, where he said, I'm sitting here next to my father?
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, so he claimed, I'm not sure if that's authentic. This is what he said. And you'll get to read it tomorrow or the next day when we release the transcript. But I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but if it is, I was high out of my mind. And that was a different Zhang. The Zhang I was talking about wasn't the one that I was doing the business with, except that doesn't really pass the smell test either. When you read Zhang's response, it was very coherent to the message, talking about, because if you're a different guy, if it's me and you, Vince, and it's some other Vince, the other Vince is going to go, what the hell are you talking about, Fallon?
Yes.
It wasn't that at all. So the facts don't back up what he's saying.
So he hid behind his drug addiction for one of the most incriminating messages on record.
100%. Yes. He said, and he did also say he absolutely was not with his father at all. He said when, like Devin Archer testified that when they were both on the board of Burisma and they were in Dubai, Vadim Pozarski asked, hey, could you call your dad? He said, oh, no, because he didn't say that on the record. So what Devin Archer would testify under oath and what he would tell people are two different things, by the way. And then, so he said, no, I might have called back to D.C., but I didn't call my dad. I could have called my daughter. I could have called back into my office. The problem he has there is if we subpoena his phone records, and he indeed did call his father, he's now under oath saying that he did not. So this is why you have a deposition, and this is why the Democrats didn't want to have a deposition, because you get into more depth.
Yes.
And actually you can have two bites of the apple, like Matt Gaetz asked a series of questions and then thought about it for an hour or two and said, you know what, I got a few more. So you can do that in a deposition. In a public hearing, you can't do that.
From where I'm sitting, I got the impression that Hunter Biden doesn't care if he lies to Congress because he knows his father's in charge of whether or not he meets any fate as a result of that. Did you get that impression today?
Well, yeah, I got the impression that he was very well rehearsed. He's with an excellent attorney, a high-priced guy, and there were certain themes. The theme was he was overly charming, tried to be overly charming and very nice, tried to remain very calm.
Yeah.
And if he got anything really got under his skin, like the question that I asked him about his father, the quote unquote loan from Jim Biden for the $200,000, I said, AmeriCorps gave your uncle $200,000. Then your uncle that same day gave your dad $200,000. Well, I have no knowledge of that. I said, well, you saw it in the press, did you not? And then he did admit, yes, I was aware of it in the press. I said, well, why didn't your father just prove to us that he originally did loan that money? That's not hard. It's $200,000. It's not something you have a wheelbarrow of pennies. You either cut a check or you wire it. Where's the proof? And then he really got mad about, well, what about Trump?
Oh, my goodness. So
yeah, he didn't want to answer the question.
Did I imagine questions about who the big guy was came up today, given that it was in his email?
Yeah. He said no knowledge that his dad was the big guy. And then he even said, like, I never referred to my dad as the chairman, because in one of the other emails he said the chairman. And then we produced emails from his business partners that said, you know, that he was referring to his dad as the chairman, right? They were conferring, and he said, well, that I wasn't in that chain. I wasn't in that email chain. So
unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. It's so brazen.
Oh, and then here's the other thing, too. He was throwing Tony Bobulinski and some other folks under the buses. They're a bunch of lying crooks. You were doing business with them all. All these guys that are in trouble in one degree or another were all people you work with. So, you know, it's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black. So what he wants to do is don't believe anything anybody testified to except me and my Uncle Jim.
Yeah.
And you know what? Let's be honest, Vince. If Hunter, Jim, and Joe keep their mouths shut, I don't know if they'll ever be convicted of anything, because he was the bad man. That's why you set up these layers to begin with.
Well, you'd think
for his dad.
Yeah, you'd think that if he's telling the truth, he would actually go out of his way to help the committee hold Tony Bobulinski accountable. Bobulinski lied to you. He lied to Congress in sworn testimony. I'm going to give you all the evidence you need to support that. Hunter Biden, I guess, today probably didn't volunteer that, did he?
He did not. And then he was pressed by Matt Gaetz about paying for his dad's household expenses. And he dismissed that as, of course, wouldn't you take your dad out to dinner? Wouldn't you buy your dad a gift? And that's not what Gaetz was saying. He's not saying the normal course of living. He's saying, did you pay like repeated expenses? Did you pay for renovations? Because again, if you're a crook and you had a half a brain, what if he just provided his dad a debit card, which has been an accusation that's out there? I'm not saying that I have proof of that, but it's real easy if it's Hunter Biden's debit card and he gives it to his dad and his dad rings hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenses onto it and neither of them say anything, they could get away with it.
Yes.
It's hard to find that stuff sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. But also the definition of what it means to accept a bribe, or like the idea that if Joe Biden is doing anything in an official capacity that's enriching his son, it doesn't actually matter if Joe Biden derives any monetary benefit from that at all. That is totally unethical and a violation of the law.
Yeah, and like for instance, he was saying like there was a meeting he had in Florida with a Chinese businessman who they exchanged gifts. And Hunter claimed that, yeah, we gave him a very expensive bottle of scotch and he gave me a diamond. But he said the diamond wasn't worth anything. How do you know that? Well, I gave it to my uncle and he said he got it checked out and it wasn't worth anything, so he threw it away. That's their story. That doesn't mean that it's true. He wants to accept that. He wants us to accept that because I'm under oath that they can't be lying. Well, where's the diamond? You just threw it out? I would have reported it to the police and said, here's what was given to me. Here's the evidence. And then you have it on record that it was worthless. We don't know if he went up to New York City and sold it for $100,000. We just don't have any knowledge of that. We're just supposed to take him at his word.
It's so crazy. They did. I saw that headline. I was like, it's ridiculous. Of course, they didn't throw it out. They sold it. They made money. They don't want anybody to know, so they say they throw it out. This, what we all suspect, at least. On Burisma,
Yep. Vince, it could be in the box from Shawshank up in Maine.
Yeah, that's right.
Freeman's going to find it.
Buried somewhere under a tree. Did Burisma come up, the idea that there was a bribe involved? What did Burisma want with Hunter Biden as a member of their company?
He said, and I quote, he was providing them corporate governance. I mean, I can't even say that without laughing. He said he had no experience at all in the energy sector, but he kept saying, like, he read his resume off and how impressive it was, and he goes, I would hold this up against any of yours as to why Burisma hired him.
Oh, come on.
But then when he was asked by Harriet Hagman, well, were you using drugs and alcohol? Were you abusing alcohol at the time in 2014? Were you an addict then? Did you disclose that to the board? Did you have a fiduciary duty to disclose that to Burisma? And he got really upset with that, and he wouldn't want to answer, and his lawyer piped in. But the gist of it was, yes. Then he said, well, I was a high-functioning addict.
Uh-huh.
So they hired a high-functioning addict that had never been to Ukraine, still to this day never been to Ukraine, has no experience at all in the energy sector. And they hired him because of his corporate governance and paid him $65,000 a month. Maybe it was because his dad was the vice president, and possibly maybe it was because his dad, as his part of his portfolio with the Biden administration, oversaw Ukraine. And maybe it was because his dad got Viktor Shokin fired, who was investigating his boss, his son's boss, Zlochevsky, who once he was fired, Zlochevsky has never been investigated to this day. Interesting.
Yeah,
which one do you want to believe?
I know it's so totally wild. And also, he had said in interviews, Hunter Biden has said publicly in at least one television interview, the only reason he got all these jobs is because his last name is Biden. So he's admitted it before. Did he admit it today?
He didn't go into that today. He just said, well, he said, there was a very clear line because my dad's been an elected official my entire life since I was like 2 years old. So I always had to deal with it, and Biden, and I knew that the name was important. So I always made sure that I never crossed that line. It was a fine line. And then when I asked him about Burisma, and doesn't that sound like it's a conflict of interest? Because I stated I think 9 different facts that he had to agree to, because they are just facts and they're indisputable.
Right.
I said that's a conflict of interest. Wouldn't it have been closer? And wouldn't the best way to avoid a conflict of interest is never to have been accepted that job in the first place? And he didn't really respond to that. But he was trying to also insinuate that him being on the board would protect Ukraine because, the geopolitical matters and aspects at the time. So hold on, for instance. So Vladimir Putin wasn't going to invade Ukraine because Burisma was paying you $65,000 a month? That's ridiculous.
I know.
Vladimir Putin never invaded Ukraine until your dad was president, by the way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Before I let you go, Pat Fallon, and again, thank you for joining us after that grueling many-hour deposition with Hunter Biden. I understand that you had a weird exchange with, at least a humorous one, with Eric Swalwell today. Is that true?
Yeah, so he's ham-fisting and grandstanding at the beginning, right? So we're just about to start the deposition, and he's not even sitting at the main table, and he pipes in and says that he's demanding a transcript be released as soon as possible. It's just grandstanding because we had already agreed with the Democrats that this transcript was going to get released somewhere between 24 and 36 hours from the end of the testimony. It was ridiculous. And then that's established. And then he says very snarkily, well, is the transcript going to be released in English or Russian? So then I said, because he was breaking the protocol anyway, and decorum, I said, no, for you, it'll be released in Chinese. He didn't say another word after that.
He did say another word. That's hilarious. Good for you. Congressman Pat Fallon, the man. Thank you very much. Good to talk to you today, sir. I really appreciate that time.
See you, brother.
Good to talk to you.